Can you confirm that you had your staff contact the minister's office to raise your concerns about this appointment?
This is really important because this ties it directly to an elected official's office. Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everyone. I'm Cypher.
And I'm Fox. Today we continue our expose of the billion-dollar slush fund scandal, which entails the government funding program via the Sustainable Development Technology Canada organization. We strongly encourage that you watch the previous videos in this series if you have not yet done so in order to provide you with the context required for what is discussed in this episode. Because of recent significant news about this scandal, we are going to try to limit the first part of this video to key events that occurred leading up to January 31st, 2024.
As you may recall in the last episode, Doug McConaughey was eviscerated by Conservative examination in which he tried to revise his earlier statements to the whistleblowers that were caught on their audio recording that was released to the public. It painted the story that Champagne's office gave him marching orders to downplay what the RCGT report contained, despite the fact that it described clear examples of the SDTC executive ignoring conflict of interest policy and misallocating over $40 million of taxpayer funding to ineligible companies.
Annette Verschuren, who we demonstrated to be a longtime donor, supporter, and friend of the Prime Minister, was appointed to the position of chair in 2019. It was also demonstrated that her own company, Enerstore, received over $219,000 in quote-unquote COVID relief money. Her resulting testimony was disastrous.
As a result of the ensuing scandal, Leah Lawrence, president of the SDTC, announced her resignation on November 10th, 2023, citing, quote, malicious campaign to undermine my leadership. Verschuren then announced her resignation from the SDTC on November 20th, 2023, where it was revealed that NR Store pays Verschuren an annual salary of $120,000, which we now see that the $219,000 in quote-unquote COVID relief paid for, and then some.
The Standing Committee on Industry and Technology subsequently requested Verschuren to return for testimony, which she refused to respond to, until the committee began discussing a formal summons, to which she finally answered and agreed to reappear on December 12th. This was despite the fact that Liberal MPs were not happy that she was to reappear, but were outvoted.
I would say, well, what's the argument for why members think that we need her to come to this committee when she's already testified at another committee? I don't really hear a good rationale for that from my perspective, but I would invite other members to provide that rationale. She's also, my understanding is that she's resigned from the board and the minister has accepted her resignation.
Conservative MP and Shadow Minister for Innovation, Science and Industry, Rick Perkins, led the charge with questions.
You were handpicked by the Prime Minister, I think, as you said in your opening remarks, right, to do this job?
I was asked by the Minister of ICID at the time.
On June 9th, 2022, the Annette Verschuren Centre was granted $2 million from a COA and an additional $2.5 million from NGen. NGen is a industry department funded organization, got $177 million from ISET. So that's 4.5 or 4.2 million, I should say. You got the Annette Verschuren Centre got on that date. Is that correct?
The Verschuren Centre is named after my parents, Tony and Annie Verschuren.
It's called the Annette. I'm sorry, it's called the Annette Verschuren Centre, and I didn't ask you the history of it. I asked you if it got that grant.
It's not called the Annette Verschuren Centre. It's called the Verschuren Centre. And that Verschuren Centre is a non-for-profit organization that has created an amazing amount of jobs in Cape Breton.
You're denying that they got the grant?
Mr. Perkins, just...
I asked the question, I have limited time, and she's ragging the puck.
I'm certainly not ragging.
Yes, you are. Answer the question,
Point of order,
please.
Chair.
Yes, Madam Khalid. I think, we do have the member here, the witness here. We would like for everybody to have a cordial conversation and make sure that we're not harassing anybody.
Yes, I agree, Mr. Perkins. I'll just ask you to, we can have a robust but respectful conversation and let the witness answer. As you've known me for some time now as chair of Indu, I'm somewhat lenient on time, and I can be liberal if witnesses take longer to respond. So I can be mindful of that. I just appreciate that we have a respectful conversation. So
did the Fish-Heron Centre...
I'll give it back to you, Mr.
Did the Fish-Heron Centre get $4.2 million on June 9th, 2022?
I don't know the exact number, but it got contributions. Yes, it was in 2010 when that was established, and Peter MacKay was there to open up
Isn't that great? September 5th, 2023, the Fish-Heron Centre got another $1 million from ACOA. Is that correct?
Not sure, but I'm sure that it is an organization that's really supported because it's doing tremendous.
It seems to be supported enormously by the Liberal government. On September 19th, it got another $3.1 million from the Industry Department. Is that correct? That's a total of $8.3 million in 1 year. Is that accurate total?
I would say that the monies that the Fish-Heron Centre got, the first tranches were under the leadership of Stephen Harper, and these more recent tranches are under the leadership of the existing government today. Yes.
Got the 8.3 plus another 1.4 million from DFO in May 2022. So that's a total of almost $10 million in about a year and a half. So I want to ask you this question. When the SDTC Investment Committee considered your proposal or the proposal from the Fish-Heron Centre for another $2.2 million in 2022, did you think that was a conflict of interest?
This grilling from committee subsequently ended in dramatic fashion in a way that nobody expected.
Look, I understand business. I've been on boards for almost 30 years. I take responsibility and governance very seriously. I am chair of a governance committee of a major company in Canada. I understand.
Citing quote-unquote technical difficulties, committee adjourned for the day. Fish-Heron may have thought that this was a clever move, but that didn't stop MPs that were actually interested in the truth to require her to appear again 2 days later.
Yes.
And you know what Section 16.2 states?
Not off the top of my head.
No member should profit or gain any income from the foundation or its activities. Also, as a public office holder during your time, you are subject to the Canadian Conflict of Interest Act for public office holders. Have you read that act?
Yes.
It says that no public office holder shall exercise their duty to further their private interests or those of their family and friends. When you and fellow directors Andre Lise-Matteau, Stephen Kukucha, and Guy Ouimet voted $3.7 million of COVID relief for companies that you have financial interest in, is that not furthering your private interests?
Well, in the case of the EnerStore project, this is a project, right? And the way these things work is that you set up a limited partnership. And so this limited partnership...
I don't need to... I didn't ask... Look, with respect, I have limited time. I have limited time. And it's easier if you actually answer my question. I don't need an explanation of the corporate structure of EnerStore. It was a simple question. When you voted the money for EnerStore and HydroStore, which you have financial interest in, and the other directors,
financial interest in
the other directors and their interest in their companies, is that not furthering your personal interest? That's all I want an answer to, yes or no.
It certainly is not advancing my personal interest, no.
When you own shares in a company and you're the major shareholder of EnerStore, CEO, and when it receives money from the government, that does not benefit your ownership?
In the case of the money that came to the 217,000 that came to Enerstore, it went into a limited partnership. That money was put into the assets of that Godrich.
You are the major shareholder.
Energy storage.
Of which you are the major
Compressed air
shareholder.
energy storage.
When the board voted to give $10.7 million in grants to companies your fellow director, Stephen Kakucha, had a financial interest in, was that not personal gain for him? $10.7 million in companies he is an investor in?
Embroiled in scandal, both Annette Verschuren and Leah Lawrence were now at the center of a maelstrom surrounding the SDTC accusations, with an Auditor General report on the horizon and a full committee investigation underway. No doubt this was going to turn into a she said battle between the two of them, so Leah Lawrence decided to listen to what we always say on Northern Perspective all the time. What is that, Fox?
Be first. As a result, Leah Lawrence returned to committee on January 31st, and her testimony blows the entire narrative around this scandal wide open. It causes a catastrophic problem for Trudeau's cabinet.
Now, let's finally take a look.
My name is Leah Lawrence, and I'm the former president and CEO of Sustainable Development Technology Canada. I served there from 2015 to 2023. When I started at SDTC, it was on the brink of shutdown, but I was able to put in place a team that transformed the organization. We took it from being consistently 20% over budget to under budget. We were formally commended by the Auditor General of Canada and the Treasury Board Secretariat for our increased flexibility, our diverse funding streams, and overhead costs that were half of those of comparable federal programs. Given this, ISED increased SDTC's funding during my tenure by over 200%. Over the last year, I spent a lot of time responding to various inquiries as a result of the actions of a whistleblower. This and the resulting media attention took a big toll on me and the organization. I felt that my leadership had become a distraction that would prevent SDTC, an organization that I had dedicated myself to for over 8 years, from fulfilling its mandate. And so, despite having the continued confidence of SDTC's board of directors, I resigned. I note that in resigning, I received no severance, and because SDTC's employees are not civil servants, no government pension. I decided to resign 2 days after appearing before the House of Commons Ethics Committee, after I listened in disbelief to ISED CFO Doug McConaughey testifying on the same panel. He told the committee he had spent 30 hours talking to SDTC's whistleblower, speculating, as evidenced by recordings obtained by media, on the outcomes of the various investigations underway, while they were still ongoing, including saying that these investigations, quote, could have been done in a way that exonerated the board and scapegoated Leah. As the ISED overseer of the investigation, Mr. McConaughey's actions were unethical and compromised the investigation. Yet, despite his actions, the investigation still found no wrongdoing or misconduct and made several administrative recommendations that the team and I were implementing when I decided to resign.
So there's a smattering of truth and falsehood in what she's saying. But the interesting thing is if you recall our episode where Doug McConaughey was testifying right next to Leah Lawrence and Annette Verschuren, we remarked that this was probably going to be a little awkward because of what Doug McConaughey was on record of saying before. So one thing to note is Leah Lawrence was put in place during the Harper government, and that's where all of the improvements to ISED actually happened. And then Annette Verschuren was appointed in 2019, and that's where all of this seemed to start going downhill, because if you also recall, the Auditor General's office did an audit of the SDTC in 2017, and everything was fine. It seems only when Trudeau started to put his own people in there that things started to go off the rails. Now, the other thing that she said is that the report found no wrongdoing. Well, I'm sorry, Leah, but it did find wrongdoing. when you talk about funds being misallocated to ineligible organizations, that's wrongdoing. And you know, if it happened once, you could call that a mistake. But even so, hundreds of thousands of dollars going to an ineligible company, I don't buy that. You people on this committee that make these decisions, you're supposed to be preventing that from happening. And the fact that over $40 million went to ineligible companies, that's a problem, including the quote-unquote COVID relief funding that went to Annette's company and our store. So there's bits and pieces of truth in there, and that's where it gets really hard, and sometimes you get really lost when you're listening to some of these people, because there is some truth in there, and you want to apply that to the rest of what they're saying, but you can't, because there's falsehoods in there.
But I'm here today to talk primarily about governance and conflict of interest. The SDTC Act and the Government of Canada set the public policy framework. The Board of Directors sets the governance framework. In the case of SDTC, half of the board is appointed by the Government of Canada. Also, an Assistant Deputy Minister from ISED attends all board meetings and is privy to all materials. That includes all funding recommendations and all discussions of conflict of interest. The CEO's and the management's job is to take that policy direction from the government and the governance direction from the board and turn it into operating practices for the organization. I note the board also approves all project funding. From 2015 to 2019, I did a lot of work on governance reform with the previous chair and the chair of governance, Jim Balsillie and Gary Lunn. A key change to harmonize the conflict of interest rules for our two categories of board members, including limiting and eliminating direct conflicts and implanting cooling off periods, was blocked when a non-government appointee got a ruling from the Ethics Commissioner they did not need to follow the same governance standards as government appointees. This made it impossible for management to hold all board members to the same rules. Early in 2019, it became very apparent to me that the government wanted to replace the chair of the board.
All right, so you see what's starting to happen with Leia's statements. She's saying, well, over half of the board is put in place by the government. She said, we wanted to strengthen our conflict of interest practices. That was blocked by the then, a non-government appointee. And now she's saying that, we did good work with the previous chair and the previous people, but now the government wanted to implant a new chair. So you see the finger pointing starting here. So she's trying to say, well, it's not me. It's the government, it's Trudeau, it's the chair. That's what she's trying to do here. And the other thing that I want to touch on before with her, where we stopped previously, is when she said she sat there in disbelief as Doug McConaughey had sat there saying on record in the 30 hours of recordings that the investigation could be done in a way to scapegoat Leia. Well, why would they want to do that? Maybe because she is a Harper appointee? Just saying.
In May or June of 2019, I was informed by ISED's official representative, ADM Andy Noseworthy, that Ms. Annette Verschuren was going to be appointed to replace Mr. Balsillie. I expressed concern SDTC was funding a project for her company. I expressed concern there was a potential for both conflict of interest and the perception of conflict of interest. I expressed concern that Ms. Verschuren and SDTC could potentially be damaged by the appointment. In the days that followed, our government relations lead contacted the minister's staff to reiterate our concerns about Ms. Verschuren's appointment, noting no previous chair had direct or perceived conflicts of interest, and further, it was previously a condition of the chair's appointment to be conflict-free.
So, this wasn't brought up before, but now that both of them are resigned and the investigation's heating up and the Auditor General is involved, I guess now it's time to talk about this stuff?
Yeah, gloves are off.
ADM Noseworthy has subsequently told me that in absence of a written policy explicitly prohibiting a beneficiary of funds from becoming chair, that the appointment would go ahead. I fear that my ongoing efforts to continue to strengthen the governance regime at the board level were largely stymied from that point on. Henceforth, it became largely an exercise in managed conflict rather than precluding or eliminating conflict. I did continue to work on governance reform with legal advisors and was pleased when the board finally adopted a policy of post-directorship cooling-off periods and hired a board ethics advisor. These are good developments. However, they're not enough. Another important reform remains outstanding, that any appointee to the board be free of conflict of interest. My second recommendation is that the Treasury Board Secretariat convene a group of chairs and CEOs from the many independent agencies that provide funds on behalf of the government and ask them what support they need to discharge their mandates from a governance and public accountability point of view. In closing, independent government-funded organizations like SDTC play an important role. They have access to people and resources that government does not, and can deliver on outcomes that complement and support government policy. The action plan that ISED has required of SDTC, and which they've implemented, does not address the matters of governance and conflict of interest that I've raised here today, and that I've advocated for throughout my time at SDTC.
Thank you, Ms. Lawrence, for being here. I appreciate it, and we all appreciate you coming. We know it's probably been a very challenging time for you, and appreciate your willingness to come here and speak of it. You mentioned in your opening statement about the period of time where there was a change in the chair. So maybe if I could start there. And you were originally hired by the newly appointed at the time Chair Jim Balsillie to clean up some of the governance practices and management practices at the place. And in 2017 or so, these internal reports were done by Treasury Board and the Auditor General. I think you said that gave SDTC a clean bill of health on all these things that you had fixed. Is that correct?
That's correct. The Auditor General's report was in 2017, and I believe just after that, the Treasury Board Secretariat report was completed.
So it would seem to me that with all of that going on, it would seem like shortly thereafter it would be an odd time to change the chair unless the chair requested that. Did in the time where that was going on, and Mr. Basile's not a shy guy, he speaks publicly on a lot of issues and has for a long time as one of the co-founders of one of Canada's most iconic companies. Did the minister's office or anyone at the political level ever contact you and express concern about what he was saying publicly while chair of SDTC?
In particular, in the time period probably in 2018 and into early 2019, there would be several moments when it was raised with me or with my team that there was concerns about public statements that Mr. Balsillie was making as an individual. At the time, there was a consultation underway on data and digital legislation, and of course, this is an area he's expert in, and he would make critiques of that legislation and provide input in his role as an individual. But often those statements, and in the aftermath of those statements, we would get calls asking about why he was making statements.
Who would you get those calls from?
In general, one occurrence happened with the Associate Deputy Minister when I was in a meeting on another thing. I was asked, should he continue as chair, and was this a thing to continue? And the second instances would be really at the working level when mid-level people would call our team of government relations. So
remember that Champagne was saying over and over again, I'm a lawyer, but he was also saying that the SDTC is independent. It's arm's length. It's, we don't get involved with them. So then why is your assistant deputy minister of ISED, right? That's Champagne's bailiwick. He wasn't the head of ISED at the time, but why are they going to the president and meddling with what their chair is saying? So that's the question, especially when Balsillie is speaking out against liberal thoughts and policy when it comes to the digital landscape. So when you have a chair of a organization that's speaking out against what your government's trying to do, well, can't have them there, I guess, eh? Heaven forbid that people have their own political beliefs.
Did that ever get communicated to you as a reason why there would be a change in the chair?
It was clear that there was evident discomfort and that they were actively looking for another chair. It's my understanding, although I was not privy to the conversations with Mr. Balsillie in the minister's office, that he wanted to continue and he communicated that to them. But around May 2019, June 2019, I was informed that there were 2 candidates that they'd like me to talk to as potential candidates for the board chair, and one of them was Ms. Verschuren.
Who informed you of that?
Minister Baines actually asked me to speak to those 2 potential candidates, and I did. And when I spoke to Ms. Verschuren, I asked her to speak to the ethics commissioner. This was well in advance of her appointment, indicating that I thought it was important that she talk to them about her direct conflicts. At the time, SDTC had a contract with her company, and this was well known. It was public information. It's posted both on SDTC's website and, of course, on Ms. Verschuren's company's website.
So, and according to your opening statement, after you, I'm assuming after, based on what you just said, after Minister Baines suggested she would be a good replacement, how many days did it take between when that happened, you did the review, and Mr. Balsillie was switched to Ms. Verschuren?
Yeah, it was about probably 2, maybe 3 weeks later when I got a call from ADM Noseworthy telling me that Ms. Verschuren would be the new chair. When I raised the concerns again, and he told me that if without a policy it would continue, it happened. And so I think it was June 19th that she was appointed. And I actually was the one who called Mr. Balsillie to tell him that he was no longer chair, and she was chairing a meeting 3 days later.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. So the minister talks with the president and says, yeah, I don't think Balsillie is going to be the chair anymore. So we have 2 people that we want you to talk to. And she raises concerns with Verschuren's conflict of interest because, you know, SDTC is funding one of her companies and nobody listens. And then a couple of weeks later, they're like, okay, so Verschuren's going to be the chair. And the president again says, conflict of interest. She has a company that is being funded by the SDTC. And they say, no, it's fine. Oh, and by the way, would you mind telling Jim? Because we don't want to tell him. Like, this is just... It's not surprising, but every instance of this cowardice that you end up seeing from the Liberal government, you know, you just shake your head. Now, Jim Balsillie has lots and lots and lots of money. If you recall, you know, he's the guy who actually built BlackBerry. So I don't have a lot of sympathy for him in terms of, you know, any financial implications on this. But still, there's just a matter of respect. And the Liberals obviously have none.
Well, that's it. If he's been putting all this work into the SDTC, could you imagine just somebody coming to you in your job that you may be passionate about and just saying, like, you're done. See you later.
Well, and he was obviously doing a pretty good job if he recognized, okay, there's problems here, there's inefficiencies, so he went out and got somebody that he believed was going to be able to address that. And by both the Treasury Board Secretariat report and the Auditor General report in 2017, Leah Lawrence had achieved that. She said that she'd actually reduced operating costs by over 20%.
That's huge. That is astronomical, especially for a government entity.
Absolutely. So then the Liberals start talking about putting in this policy and their approach to the digital landscape. And then Balsillie starts, you know, speaking out personally against it. And then the government says, oh, well, we can't have that, can we?
Well, yeah, he's probably pointing out things that are of concern that may raise cost, may cause inefficiencies, and the government's just like, that guy's talking too much. Let's get him out of here.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's just another example of the Liberal government and how they don't like dissenting opinions. Well, that's the radical left in general, I guess. So you have situations where the conflict of interest policy was tried, Leah Lawrence tried to update that. That was squashed. And then Jim Balsillie is speaking out against the Liberal platform while they're in government. She is subsequently told, well, no, we have to get rid of him. And then you end up with two candidates, quote unquote, one, and Annette Verschuren has a direct conflict of interest with the actual position. So then she gets the position. And then Leah Lawrence is told she's the one that actually has to fire the guy who hired her in the first place.
This seems to me like they're trying to get rid of all of Harper's old guys and gals who were running the company properly so that the Liberals could come in and take it over and start running it into the ground.
And use it as a slush fund.
So this is where this idea of managed conflict comes from, that somehow you could manage the conflict that the government was aware of when they appointed her?
Well, I have to say that the management team has to put in place policies and procedures that are required when they are following the direction of the board and or the government when they have an appointee who has a direct conflict. So yes, now we're in a position of direct conflict where you have to have a disclosure, which we did have before, but it did not have a chair's name on it with a direct conflict. And then you have to make sure that you are following the procedures very closely.
But I'm not understanding whether you had a policy or not, which seemed to be the issue, saying you didn't have a policy on conflict, so it was okay to have conflicts. When the SDTC Act itself in Clause 16.2 states that no member should profit or gain any income from the foundation of the activities, clearly the Associate Deputy, the Deputy, and Minister Baines in making that appointment must have been aware of that. And if they weren't aware of that, they must have been aware of Section 4 of the Public Office Holder Act, which says that in the exercise of their duty that no public office holder shall further their private interests to those of their family and friends. They must have been aware of that, regardless of whether or not you had a corporate governance policy on it, that they were breaking those acts by doing this.
I was never asked about any of those things, and I do not know if they reviewed those before making the appointment.
I have about another 30 seconds.
Okay, so can you just explain to me again, and for everybody that's watching, what a managed conflict means? Because any board I've served on, and I've served on a number, you don't go on a board, first of all, if you have a conflict and you're doing business with that organization. That's just normal corporate and individual ethics. You don't do that. And secondly, if you are on a board and a conflict comes, you choose probably to leave that board if that conflict isn't more important to your business interest than being on the board. You make a choice. But in this case, it doesn't seem like managed conflict means that. It means you can have your cake and eat it too, it seems.
Well, I can't speak for the board members. I can tell you what the process is. They have to declare their conflicts. Conflicts are talked about at the beginning of every meeting. When a conflict has been declared, they are required, they do not receive the materials related to that conflict. They have to leave the meeting as part of the conflict of interest policy when anything related to their declared conflicts is discussed. And that's how it had to be managed once people had conflicts declared.
So, yeah, you're not supposed to be serving on a board that is doing business with an organization that you're a part of or that you could benefit from.
Well, and that's not just, as I said, with government, or that's not just with some companies. Like that's standard practice everywhere.
Yeah, and the fact that essentially the president of the SDTC was overruled and said, no, you're getting this chair. And then they had to put in this process where they, at the beginning of every meeting, they're like, all right, does anybody own any companies? It's like, what? That is a huge red flag. Huge. This is where, I think my brain is melting because of the obvious problems with this. And never mind the fact that Rick Perkins outlined, well, there's actually legislation out there that says you can't do this. Yet the Liberal minister and his assistant deputy minister were doing this anyway. So, yeah, is it because Annette Verschuren was a personal friend of Justin Trudeau's?
It's because Liberal insiders don't have to play by their rules.
You made Assistant Deputy Minister Andrew Noseworthy aware of the conflicts of interest and problems in appointing Miss Annette Verschuren as chair of the board in advance of her appointment. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Mr. Noseworthy was aware that by appointing her, ISED was violating their own contribution agreement with Sustainable Development Technology Canada. Is that correct?
I would have thought he would have known that, given that he is overseeing the organization and he knows what the Act and the contribution agreement say.
Can you confirm that you had your staff contact the minister's office to raise your concerns about this appointment?
Yes, we had several discussions at the staff level, and so there were bilateral discussions with the minister's office, and it was told to the minister's office that the previous chair had not had conflicts, and that in fact, in our knowledge, there had never been a chair with a company that was being funded by SDTC.
Wow, so you have Leah Lawrence saying that before Verschuren was actually appointed, we told the minister's office, hey, you can't do this. This lady has a direct conflict of interest, and this is violating the SDTC contribution agreement with the government. What are you doing? Right here, folks. This is the problem. This is really important because this ties it directly to an elected official's office. Because there's obviously going to be a paper trail here, and that's not going to be good. And just to be clear, Champagne didn't take over as the minister of ISED until 2021. At the time, it was another Liberal MP, Navdeep Bains, and that's who they keep referring to.
And what was the year that this appointment was happening, and who was the minister?
June 2019, and the minister was Minister Navdeep Bains.
So 2019, the Trudeau government went ahead with the appointment after you had raised concerns with the minister about the conflict.
That's correct.
So the Minister of Innovation, personally aware of serious problems with appointing Annette Verschuren, but did it anyway. I'm asking for a third time because this is surprising.
Mr. Bains did not tell me directly. I did not communicate him with directly, but Ms. Verschuren has said that she's talked to Mr. Bains 3 times before she agreed. And she said that he did know that she had the direct conflict.
Uh-oh. That's a big problem. That means the Trudeau cabinet knew that she had conflict of interest and was asked to join the SDTC anyway. And I'm sure, quote unquote, Verschuren was asked to join a organization that would have directly benefited her and her company.
Oh, she probably jumped at the opportunity.
100%. 100%.
That's what's so gross about these Liberals. They do what they want, when they want. Ethics laws be damned. And they think they can get away with it.
And they put the cost and the bill on the Canadian taxpayer. This is gross.
Why do you believe they were determined to replace the former chair with a chair that had been identified as being in conflict? Why was it so important to pick her?
I don't know. In fact, at the time that I was informed that they were going to replace the chair, I was asked by Minister Bains to speak to 2 candidates. I did speak to 2 candidates. The other one declined to put their name forward.
Did that candidate have a conflict of interest?
They did not, but they were concerned that they may invest in the sector in the future, and so that therefore they felt that they should not put their name forward.
Okay, I don't have a lot of time, but it's really important to understand. There was a conflict that the board chair that they'd put forward to appoint that she was in because she had an interest in companies that had received money from SDTC. Is that correct?
Her company had a contract with SDTC at the time of her appointment.
Right. So a conflict before taking the position, and is now under investigation by the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner for taking or directing funds from SDTC and voting for it for a company that she had an interest in. You're aware that that's the case as well?
I understand those investigations are ongoing, yes.
Do you know how often Annette Verscharen was in contact with the minister at ISED?
With the most recent minister, I believe as far as I know, she only met with him twice, one at an announcement and one at a summit, once at a summit.
Did she deal with the deputy minister?
I believe they had ongoing dialogues, yes.
And who was the deputy minister that she would have been communicating with?
Deputy Minister Simon Kennedy.
How often would she have dealt with Mr. Kennedy?
I couldn't say.
More than 10 times?
I don't know. Whenever an issue would have come up that would have pertained to SCTC, so contribution agreements, encouragement of change in acts, those kinds of things.
And who acted as the liaison between SDTC and ISED?
At that level, she contacted the deputy minister directly. At my level, I dealt almost exclusively with Andy Noseworthy.
Did Veena Bulhar
yeah.
Fill that role, or Amber Batul?
So Veena Bulhar was our government relations lead, and at some points Amber Batul would have had communications with the minister's office. It would have been at the policy chief level, yes.
So, with a little bit of digging, we were able to find something interesting. Well, what was that? So, in February of 2019, Jim Balsillie ended up making some public comments about a Liberal MP, Adam Vaughan, lying at a parliamentary committee. It doesn't even really matter what he was accusing him of lying about. But this is the thing. Jim Balsillie doesn't really care about what he says. He just speaks what he thinks he needs to say. If you know Jim Balsillie through the media, if you've seen him throughout the years, he does what he wants, right? And consequences are suffered where they need to be. So I think it's very interesting that in February of 2019, Jim Balsillie is publicly accusing a Liberal MP of lying, and then later that year, he is replaced as chair. I find that very interesting. And then, who takes over as chair? Someone who has donated thousands and thousands of dollars to the Liberal campaign, to the Liberal Party. Someone who is a personal friend of Justin Trudeau's. Someone who visited Washington with Trudeau when Trump was in power. And now you have this person who is taking over at the SDTC to, stop these Harper appointees of, what are you doing putting in efficient process? What are you doing of putting in controls that actually prevents conflict of interest? We can't have that. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is an extremely important meeting here because Leah Lawrence is now just laying it out for the committee because it doesn't matter to her anymore. She's not at the SDTC. So she's like, oh yeah, this lady, corrupt as hell. And the ministers knew it. And the ministers were pushing for her to be there. And I'm sure she was pushing for herself to be there as well. Why not? Be a part of a government organization that you end up benefiting from, that pays your salary for your own organization when you just hand money out to it. And clearly, because there's no, real conflict of interest policy at the SDTC, it becomes a problem. And then Leah Lawrence has to implement what she calls, quote unquote, managed conflict when there's any issues that arise at the meetings on what companies they're going to be providing funding to. So, like, this is crazy, man. This is on a different level of crazy than the ArriveCan app scandal, and the ArriveCan app scandal is crazy. You literally have elected officials now tied to this, knowingly violating parliamentary acts. This is all coming to a head, folks, when it relates to the SDTC scandal, the ArriveCan scandal. SNC-Lavalin keeps trying to rear its ugly head because Larry Brock keeps trying to drag it along and push it back into the limelight. And then you have all of this other business that has happened like recently. So this is going to get really bad for the Liberals really, really quick. And this may ending up in the culmination of a forced election, and Jagmeet Singh would have all of the manufactured justification that he wants. Because he gets to stand up and say, I'm on the side of righteousness, I'm on the side of justice and integrity, and I can't deal with all of these scandals that the Trudeau government is doing, and he's taking money out of the Canadian taxpayer pocket and all this stuff. And by the way, pharmacare and all this, like, the Conservatives are literally putting all this on a platter for Jagmeet Singh. And the problem is if he chooses not to take any of this off the plate, now he gets painted with that same brush, and it gets really bad really quick for the NDP. So this is where we're at, folks. We had to, rush through the missing meetings that we hadn't covered yet, but we wanted to make sure we got everybody up to date because of this really important testimony by Leah Lawrence that directly ties this corruption to the Trudeau cabinet. And we await more meetings in the upcoming weeks as we see what could possibly happen next.